Good afternoon, everyone. It is particularly sad not to be there in person today, especially as I'm not very good at making videos, but I will try. Thinking back to the summer of 2018 when I proposed agroecologies, for me, that was an opportunity to continue my work as an architectural technologist whose work lies at the intersection of agriculture, buildings, and food. Up until then, most of my work had primarily focused on taking waste from agriculture and upcycling them into healthy building materials. For me, this was a very important imperative, primarily because we produced 1 billion megagrams of these materials, and largely a large percentage of stuff that do not make its way onto our plate are undervalued. Although the work had initially focused on agricultural waste like coconut husk, corn husk, hemp, for me, agroecologies became an opportunity to look at stuff that was coming out of our plates and in our homes. And this intimate scale allowed me to look more deeply at social and cultural issues that were at the heart of finding new ways of transforming our attitudes around waste and upcycling. So whether this was food waste or agricultural waste, the common denominator in the work was to leverage the building material life cycle to take inputs from other life cycles and transform them into materials that reduced energy throughout their use and production phase, reduce emissions. And I became very interested in using an emerging bioadhesive known as mycelium, which is the vegetative state of fungi, to use these materials as food and grow over the course of 5 days into non-toxic materials that could be used for temporary periods within our homes. By looking at what is on the plate and the waste that comes out of our meals, I began to look at developing not only the materials but the actual rituals that went along with producing these meals and taking their waste and growing and feeding them to mycelium. The literal growing of oyster mushrooms from coffee ground waste was a ritual that I chose to focus on for the Forecast Festival in October 2018. And through the abstraction of space and the divorce from the actual familiarity of our kitchen architecture, I wanted to understand how the rituals of preparing coffee and taking the coffee grounds from that drink could be mapped in order to understand the spatial requirements and the actual performance aspects of waste transformation from coffee. As part of the Istanbul Biennial, a month later, I grew the actual food mushrooms using Turkish coffee ground wastes in collaboration with a chef I had been working with in order to understand that the actual transformation of rituals and our recipes was a deeply political, cultural, and social exercise. In the lead up to the Copenhagen Architectural Festival in April 2019, I began to focus more closely on the kitchen infrastructure itself, including the objects that are held within our kitchen and define its use. And these were incredibly useful to understand how we could reduce the barriers to this technology by taking everyday objects that were found within our kitchens and using them as molds to generate different types of mycelium objects. For us, this was incredibly important to derive a new set of catalog of materials grown from different objects that we were already familiar with. As part of the Copenhagen Architectural Festival, I collaborated with a bartender who developed different types of cocktails that were that used the citrus-based waste that was used to grow these new types of kitchen objects. For us, it was important to discuss this new catalog of objects that were grown from the IKEA catalog, and also what qualities aesthetically, texturally, sensorily that we liked or did not about these materials. Following the Copenhagen Architecture Festival, I began to pursue three paths of development towards the final exhibition, which mainly looked at, firstly, the development of an agro and food waste composite using hemp and lemon waste. We developed many types of boards that varied not just the agro waste and food waste composition, but their growing parameters. These were tested mechanically and thermally in order to develop more robust building materials to be used in the growing of objects or kitchen, wall, or tabletop panels. Secondly, I began to also look at understanding the level of prototyping resolution that these mycelium materials could grow within. We investigated different types of surface textures of these materials and developed forms that could be integrated into the actual kitchen infrastructure itself to grow these materials within the kitchen when it is needed. We integrated other types of materials, including blocks that allowed these panels to be screwed into the kitchen infrastructure, tried to understand ways of economizing on space and developing forms that generated multiple mycelium products over the same period of time. As part of Housing the Human 2019, the goal was to show the range of applications and products that could be derived throughout the development of these forms. We showed objects that were grown for the Copenhagen Festival and more directly kitchen objects like wall panels, tabletop panels that were integrated into an apartment setting wherein two actors activated the space by performing morning and evening rituals where they took waste from coffee and lemon water. For me, the performance was incredibly important. It was inspired by Chantal Ackermann's Gentil Maintaineri Brussels, because it allowed us to give these mundane tasks that we perform every day in our homes the deserved attention and focus they need in order to make us understand that our behaviors around waste transformation can shift from this sort of punitive paradigm into something that is more aspirational. To me, this integration of the rituals within the actual mycelium-based infrastructure that was staged was incredibly valuable, and I hope to use the footage and study of mapping how the kitchen, the actual acts of taking and preparing food and taking waste from that meal can derive and go back into a new type of architecture, one that is quite unfamiliar and one that prioritizes waste preparation as much as cooking itself.